Good evening. It's Scotland at 7 on the 25th, Tuesday, the 25th of July. My name is Brian Liddy. Apologies that we're coming in a couple of minutes late, but I'm here. We're here now, ready to give you tonight's news. And we have our guest this evening is Maureen Watt. Maureen is, as an SNP MSP, Maureen, you were a Minister for Mental Health and you represented Aberdeen South and North Kincardine. You've also been a teacher and a counsellor, but it's our good fortune that you're now retired because it means that you've got time to spend the next hour with us. So welcome, Maureen. How are you?
Thank you very much and good evening.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for joining us. So I'll start with tonight's Ukraine update, which is day 517, and then I'll go straight on to read the first item of today's news. So, Ukrainian military spokesperson Andriy Kovalyov, the Ukrainian said that the Ukrainian forces are making small advances against the Russian occupiers in parts of southern Ukraine, and Ukrainian troops have moved forward in the direction of the southeastern village of Staromaysky. Ukraine is also claiming a territorial gain near Bakhmut. The UN's International Atomic Energy Agency chief, Rafael Grossi, said today that on the 23rd of July, experts visiting the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant saw anti-personnel mines located in a buffer zone between the site's internal and external perimeter barriers. The statement did not say how many mines the team had seen. Russian state-owned media TASS is reporting that Russian forces claim to have destroyed 2 boats and killed 9 service personnel while repulsing another Ukrainian attempt to land on the occupied left bank of the Dnieper River near the Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson. President Zelensky has said that he has spoken to Rishi Sunak about Russia's daily attempts to destroy Odessa's historic centre and port infrastructure. Ukraine's president said Ukraine urgently needs to strengthen its air defence to protect its historical heritage and continue the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The UK Ministry of Defence has claimed in its daily operational briefing that since the start of the war, Russia's strike campaign has been characterised by poor intelligence and a dysfunctional targeting process. The Biden administration is to send up to $400 million in additional military aid to Ukraine, including a variety of munitions for advanced air defence systems and a number of small surveillance Hornet drones. Russia said it had neutralised 2 Ukrainian drones over Moscow in the early hours of yesterday, with one crashing close to the Defence Ministry in the city centre. Officials said the drones hit non-residential buildings in the capital and that there were no casualties. Almost 30 ships dropped anchor near Ukraine's crucial Izmail port terminal after Russia attacked grain warehouses on the Danube River on Monday. Yesterday's pre-dawn Russian airstrikes wounded 7 people and hit infrastructure along the Danube, a vital alternative route for Ukrainian grain since Russia withdrew from the Black Sea grain deal last week. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov claimed a cathedral in Odessa was struck by a Ukrainian air defence missile. A child was killed and 6 people wounded in a Russian strike on the eastern Ukrainian city of Kostiantynivka, according to the region's governor, Pavlo Kielenko. Dylan Collins, a journalist working for Agence France Presse, was wounded by a Russian drone attack while reporting from a Ukrainian artillery position near the battle-torn eastern city of Bakhmut, according to AFP reporters who witnessed the attack. So that was quite a lengthy Ukraine report, and our next item is also quite long in terms of text. So to save time, I'm going to go straight on and say that our next item is scientists from the World Weather Attribution Group have reported that the recent deadly heat waves that have hit Europe and the US were caused by global heating and the climate crisis. A report published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, in March, which was endorsed by the world's governments, also said that the window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future was rapidly closing. Earlier this month, temperature records reached all-time highs across southern Europe, the western United States and Mexico, and China, leading to wildfires and heat-related deaths. The hottest global temperatures in measured history occurred in the first week of July. According to a recent study, over 61,000 people died in the European heatwaves last year, including over 3,000 people in the UK. A separate study estimates the global number of heat-related deaths would be in the millions. The World Weather Attribution Group's report made use of peer-reviewed methods to quantify the impact of the climate crisis on recent heatwaves, with data up to the 18th of July and computer models which compare today's climate with the cooler climate of the 1800s. The study found that in the current hotter climate, the heat waves are to be expected about every 5 years in China, every 10 years in Europe, and 15 years in the US, but will happen with increasing frequency as emissions rise. Dr. Friedrich Ott at Imperial College London, UK, who was part of the analysis team, said, "Such heat waves are no longer rare, and the most important thing is these extremes kill people, particularly destroying the lives and livelihoods of the most vulnerable," adding that politicians often claim that they care about normal people and poor people. If we did value people, it's pretty obvious what we need to do. I don't think stronger evidence has ever been presented for a scientific question. Rishi Sunak and the wider UK government are apparently in the midst of reconsidering policies which aim to tackle climate change and global heating, with Jacob Rees-Mogg arguing for the 2030 ban on new petrol and diesel cars to be pushed back, Housing Secretary Michael Gove proposing to relax the 2028 deadline for landlords in the private rented sector to make energy efficiency improvements to their properties, and Energy Secretary Grant Shapps stating that the government's policy was to max out the North Sea's oil and gas stores. On the topic of the UK government's goal to reach net zero by 2050, the Prime Minister's official spokesperson said that it is right that if the situation changes and new technology evolves, that we keep our approach under review and make sure it is the right one. Commenting on the results of the scientific study, CEO of the Climate Group, Helen Clarkson, said that the UK government rowing back on green policies is both astonishing at a time when the impacts of climate change are getting worse and economically irresponsible. Previous moves to scrap green policies on home insulation added at least £2.5 billion to the UK's energy bills during the cost of living crisis. The World Weather Attribution Group study found the heatwaves in Europe and the US were, at minimum, made 950 and 4,400 times more likely by global heating, making it virtually certain that they were the result of human-caused emissions. Heatwaves, the scientists report, will only worsen as emissions rise. If the global temperature rises by only 2 degrees Celsius, deadly heatwaves like those seen this month will happen every 2 to 5 years. So, Maureen, again, apologies for that lengthy Ukraine update and then the rather lengthy report. So I think we're already a little bit out of time. But my question to you is the stats on climate change in this report are alarming, but equally alarming for me is that this item the part where it talks about the Westminster government is planning to relax measures and to continue to produce oil and gas. Does it alarm you?
Well, first of all, please don't apologise for the lengthy introduction about Ukraine. I'm sure a lot of people like me tune in because this is one place where you can every day get a really good synopsis of and comprehensive synopsis of what is happening in Ukraine. In terms of the heat waves and the climate crisis and Westminster's reaction, I mean, this is just unbelievable. I mean, whether you believe in climate change or not, I think everybody on this planet has a duty to leave it in a better state than we found it. I mean, that is what I was brought up to believe because you're always, as a farmer's daughter, you're supposed to make sure that you left the land in a better state than you found it. And, you know, I heard Lord Frost say on the radio that, you know, more people die in this country of cold than heat. Therefore, that's not a reason for doing anything about climate change. I mean, seriously? I mean, these people are like, I don't know, flat earthers. And talking about using climate change as another Brexit in order to get people to vote for the Conservatives. I mean, what planet are these people on? Firstly, are they, as you say, you talked a lot about what scientists were saying. They're prepared to ignore all the science on climate change for a cheap political headline that they think will fool people again to vote for the Tory party. I mean, I just think after the election defeat at the weekend there, they think that this is a wheeze that might get them re-elected again because they're so desperate to hold on to power so that they can help their Tory pals for the next 5 years like they've done since 2010. I mean, I just cannot get my head round how people can think like this. People who are in positions of power have a vast array of civil servants and scientists from universities and others to help them develop policy, but yet they come out with this. How is it happening, Brian?
I wish I could answer that for you, Maureen. But I'll move on to the next item because we're going to struggle to fit everything in. So, wildfires caused in part by the extreme heat wave have encircled Palermo in Sicily. Local authorities temporarily closed the airport and part of a motorway as more than 55 wildfires were reported on the Italian island. Excuse me. Hundreds of firefighters from other regions in Italy were due to arrive yesterday to help tame the flames. More than 120 families have been evacuated from homes in Mondello, Capogallo and Polio Ridente since Monday, and an 80-year-old woman was reported to have died in San Martini del Scala as the disruption caused by fires prevented the emergency services from reaching her in time. Temperatures in Palermo reached 47 degrees Celsius, breaking the previous record of 44.8 degrees set in 1999. Hospitals across the city are reporting a sharp increase in the number of people in need of emergency care due to heat-related illness. In Italy's northern regions, storms, hailstones, torrential rain and gales continue to cause disruption, with widespread damage to the railway network and fallen trees blocking the metro in Milan. Giuseppe Sala, the mayor of Milan, reported that residents endured a sleepless night as winds exceeded 63 miles per hour. Commenting on the extreme weather, Salsa said that what we are seeing is not normal. We can no longer deny that climate change is changing our lives. We can no longer turn a blind eye, and above all, we can't not do anything. So Maureen, I'm beginning to feel as if I'm playing a newsreader in a movie, a disaster movie that's about climate change with these stories tonight. Um, and at the weekend there on Full Scottish, we were asking what will it take for people and governments to set up and take action? Do you think, is this going to finally happen?
Well, you would certainly hope so. And um, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of governments are taking action to be fair, but is it in the right place? Maybe we can say that having a battery plant in Somerset set up is good news, but it's far too late. There's still not the investment in retrofitting housing that is needed. Um, so is there more proactive stuff that countries that are likely to um, experience wildfires that they can take, like dousing the land with water is one of the things that I've heard. But the good thing is that places like Italy and Greece and Turkey even are helping each other out, and at least they can do it on an EU basis, and that Turkey will obviously be helping because we know that they want to come into the EU. But it relates to our previous subject, in showing that if this doesn't motivate countries across the world to take cognizance of climate change, I don't know. I mean, these are temperatures that people in sub-Saharan Africa and other places.
Maureen, Maureen,
Um,
Maureen, do you think, I'm just, time is short, but do you think we've maybe already passed the point of no return when it comes to climate change?
oh, I hope not. I hope not. For goodness sake, what kind of? I'm expecting a grandchild, my first grandchild in the next few days. Please don't talk like that, because
Sorry.
what kind of planet are we leaving for her?
Yeah. Is it okay if we move on? Yeah. Is it okay if we move on to the next item? Try and catch up a wee
Of
bit of time.
course,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay. No, no, don't. Please don't apologise. Um, Large pay increases for highly paid workers in London and the South East have masked real wage cuts across large areas of the economy and led to a widening in the UK's geographical earning gap, according to a study from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. The study found that while workers' pay in some areas, including manufacturing, education and hospitality, had fallen in inflation-adjusted terms, in other sectors such as IT, business services and the city there had been significant rises. Many workers, including those in London, are now between 1 and 4% worse off than they were pre-pandemic, despite evidence of labour shortages across the UK. By utilising payroll data from HMRC, the IFS concluded that pay growth has been concentrated in the well-paid parts of the economy since the pandemic, and that this has led to real mean earnings for employees in London rising by 5% since February to around £4,400 a month before tax, compared with a wider national increase of 2.7%. Xiaowei Zhu, the senior, and forgive me if I've mispronounced your name, the senior research economist at the IFS, said that inequality in mean earnings across the country had been falling in the 2 decades leading up to the pandemic, with the poorest areas seeing the highest pay growth. Since 2020, we have seen a reversal of that trend, with strong pay growth in business services benefiting London's top earners. The IFS study revealed that the biggest real pay increases in the 2020-23 period had been enjoyed by workers in the energy and administration and support sectors, which saw rises of close to 10%. Business services recorded increases of 8.6%, and wages in finance, despite a fall from their peak in mid-2022, were 7.6% above their pre-pandemic level. Earnings in information and communications were up by 5.5%. In contrast, there were 10 sectors in which inflation-adjusted earnings were lower than they were at the start of 2020. The biggest drop of around 4% was in the real estate sector, but there were also declines of 1% or more in mining and quarrying, accommodation and food, manufacturing, transportation and storage, construction, arts and entertainment, education, water and public administration. So Maureen, are you surprised at this news? And if not, what could be done about it? Is a minimum or a real living wage really going to hack it anymore?
Yeah, that's interesting you ask that question, Brian, because I don't think that big pay rises to top earners is anything to be surprised about, because we know that the rich look after themselves, and we heard that Alison Rose of head of NatWest earns 500,000 a year. Now, what can people do with that kind of money? They, it must find it difficult to spend it all. But um, this rise in inflation this time round has led to a term called greedflation. And I think maybe that is what this survey is showing. And there was also a report yesterday or the day before which showed, which said something like, the minimum wage is maybe not doing what it should do. Now, a minimum wage is there to show businesses that this is what they need to be paying, because otherwise they would put it as low as they could possibly get away with, which at the moment, because there are fewer workers than are required, um, is not going to work. But I mean, the minimum wage is not a living wage or even the real living wage. And I'm seeing myself that an increasing number of employers are still trying to get away with paying their workers, the minimum wage or as near as damn it to it. So I think there's a job for the trade unions to be, I wasn't always in favor of, if one grade goes up, the other grade goes up. But maybe we need to the unions need to be bargaining a lot better in the private sector, especially to make sure that workers of different experience and qualifications get the wages that they're due.
I think a
I'll
lot
leave
of
it at
people
that.
would agree with you. I think a lot of people would agree with you that unionisation is definitely part of the answer. But thank you. I'll move on to our next item. Northern Ireland could lose around half of its veterinary medicines due to ongoing debates around Brexit. The British Veterinary Association has told the Lords Committee on Northern Ireland that it was extremely concerned about the issue, despite the Windsor framework that was sealed between Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen, European Commission President, in March, being promoted as a solution to the ongoing discussions and difficulties around Northern Ireland. The issue centres on the requirement in place for the manufacturers of medicines for farm animals and pets to get their medicines batch tested in the EU before they can be sold in Northern Ireland. The BVA welcomed the announcement of a grace period for the continuing movement of the products into Northern Ireland until 2025. However, it said that unless a permanent solution was found, sales of medicine ranging from anaesthetics to vaccines for salmonella could be discontinued. A similar problem has arisen under the original Northern Ireland Protocol for hospital and pharmacy medicines, which has since been solved. The problem is one of several raised in a new report by the House of Lords Protocol on Northern Ireland Committee. Commenting on the issue, the BVA said that the failure to obtain a permanent solution could see Northern Ireland lose access to 51% of the veterinary medicines it currently receives. This would affect all sectors: farm, equine, pigs, poultry and pets, and will have a significant implication on animal health and welfare, public health, trade and the agricultural economy. So, Maureen, a little bit about Sunak's Windsor framework, which was mentioned briefly there. That was agreed with Brussels, and that sought to cut bureaucracy on trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland after Brexit. And it's actually directly relates to that issue when Boris Johnson was filmed telling businessmen in Northern Ireland that if there was going to be any friction, then he would chuck the paperwork in the basket. And now it seems that there's still going to be a grace period, so it shows that Brexit still is not done yet, it's still not over with. But what do you think about this main thrust that this surely is going to have an impact on the quality of meat or produce that we are able to buy in the shops, and that animals are going to be less well cared for?
Yes, we're seeing almost daily now the effects of Brexit hitting home. And if you remember, in the campaign for Brexit, medicines, particularly relating to humans rather than animals, was one of the things that was raised early on by the likes of the SNP's Westminster spokesperson, Philippa Whitford. This is so I need to declare an interest because until I retired, I was an honorary associate of the British Veterinary Association. But the the thing here is, we already hear about shortages of vets, particularly in large animals, and this just adds more pressure on hard-pressed veterinary practices. And you know, obviously, Britain has got to back down on this. But as I said at the beginning, it's just another example of Lord Frost and Boris Johnson trying to get Brexit done at any cost whatsoever, and we're now seeing the costs piling on, literally and practically.
And do you think this reduction in medication, is there a chance that it's going to mean a greater risk of things like foot and mouth outbreaks?
Oh, as a farmer's daughter, no, because you don't usually inject against something like foot and mouth. I
Okay.
don't think. Um, but you know, vets and farmers are trying to reduce the amount of medicines that they need in order that farming is more sustainable. But clearly, like a doctor, a vet needs all the medicines in his medicine bag, like as I said, GPs. So it is worrying, and I can see why the vets in Northern Ireland have raised this, and hopefully a solution to it can be found soon.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Doctors across Israel are set to strike today in protest of a part of Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial overhaul. This comes after thousands of protesters took to the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv on Monday night. The Israeli Medical Association, which says it represents about 95% of doctors, said it would hold a 24-hour protest with exemptions for medical care in Jerusalem and emergency care across the country. It had previously held a brief strike last week as a warning, arguing that the judicial overhaul would devastate the healthcare system, according to the intern doctors' organisation. According to the intern doctors' organisation, doctors are expected to be joined in their strike action today by 73% of interns. Health Minister Moshe Arbil is reportedly seeking an injunction to prevent the doctors' strike from going ahead. Legal action, a general strike and possible refusal from upwards of 10,000 military reservists to report for duty are now also a possibility as Israel faces its largest ever domestic crisis. The judicial overhaul bill, which sparked a protest, abolishes the reasonableness clause that allows Israel's unelected Supreme Court to overrule government decisions. It was passed into law yesterday by a final vote of 64-0 in Parliament. Every member of Netanyahu's coalition voted in favour, while opposition lawmakers abandoned the Knesset plenum in protest, shouting shame as they left. Around 20,000 protesters took to the streets around Parliament in Jerusalem on Monday night. Some had marched to the city over 4 days last week. Malls and businesses in many cities closed their doors in solidarity. Police used water cannons and skunk gas to disperse protesters blocking roads. Many protesters put plugs in their noses or plucked rosemary from nearby bushes to try to ease the smell from the skunk gas. At least 19 arrests have been made. Thousands of people also demonstrated in central Tel Aviv, the focal point for months of anti-government protests. Confrontations took place between police and protesters, with at least 8 people being arrested and demonstrators lighting bonfires. Police said they had arrested a driver who hit a group of protesters in central Israel, injuring 3 people. So, Maureen, Israel's often held up as the sole democracy in the Middle East. Is that a title it can still claim, or is it at risk?
I think it's very much at risk, Brian. I heard one commentator this morning saying that Israel could very quickly descend into civil war as a result of this. I mean, Netanyahu is an example of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's been in and out of power for ages and ages. And you know, why any leader in a democracy would think that, well, I was going to say, thinks that he can do this, but then Trump tried to influence very hugely the Supreme Court in the United States. But, you know, to think that the people aren't going to rise up against this and meekly accept it ain't going to happen. So, yes, it's a very worrying state for Israel to be in, and I think you know that Netanyahu and his government have to be deposed, and new elections take place very quickly if this isn't going to descend into, if not civil war, civil unrest. You know, the more people that take to the streets, when do you distinguish between civil unrest and civil war? So I suspect that you'll be coming on Broadcasting Scotland back to this story quite frequently in the next few days and weeks.
I think you're probably right there, Maureen. So I'll move on to our next item. The BBC has issued an apology after one of its reporters asked Morocco's football captain an inappropriate question before the team's World Cup match against Germany yesterday. Morocco's debut at the tournament in Australia made it the first Arab and North African team to qualify for the Women's World Cup. However, the question, directed at the team's captain, Ghislaine Chebak, about LGBTQ+ rights, has since become the focus of the event. At the post-match media conference, a BBC reporter stated that in Morocco it's illegal to have a gay relationship, asking, "Do you have any gay players in your squad, and what's life like for them in Morocco?" In response to the question, Chebak winced, removed her earpiece and looked to her coach, Renald Pedros, before laughing. A FIFA official interjected, saying, "Sorry, this is a very political question," and asked the reporter to stick to questions relating to football. The reporter then replied, "No, it's not political, it's about people," adding, "Please let her answer the question." Today, a BBC spokesperson said, "We recognise that the question was inappropriate. We had no intention to cause any harm or distress, and it is understood that the matter was addressed by FIFA after the conclusion of the press conference." So, Maureen, this reminds me of the last World Cup, which I'm not a football fan, but so remind me, was it in Saudi Arabia? And BBC correspondents like Gary Lineker, Qatar, thank you for the voice in my ear. Uh, BBC correspondents and reporters like Gary Lineker, they were encouraged to highlight inequalities like this. Do you think, can sport and politics mix when it comes to human rights?
Well, I agree with commentators who are saying that the BBC were totally wrong there. I mean, the BBC doing something like this, what on earth were they thinking about? You know, you're prying into individuals' lives of the Moroccan team. That is totally and utterly unacceptable. I mean, what we should be doing is welcoming Morocco into the Women's World Cup, praising them for the fact that not only have they obviously got a good football team, but they had the defeated champion in Wimbledon this year. So, the fact that Morocco is rising as a sporting nation should be the story, not, as I say, in prying into people's individual orientations. It's just an utter nonsense. I mean, to me, that person, whoever asked the question, should be given a severe warning, and a written warning at that, in their file, so that any other breach means that they're out in their ear.
It's
That's
almost
what employment law is for.
Yeah, it's almost as if the reporter was asking them to out colleagues live on air or something, but
Yeah, yeah,
which would have been
absolutely horrific.
quite
I mean,
something.
yeah, what century does that person live in?
Yeah. So I'll move on to the next item, though, if that's okay, Maureen.
Yep.
Thank you. The Scottish Government has announced that 3 specialist intensive care neonatal units for babies born at highest risk are to be based in Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Glasgow. Care for babies born at less than 27 weeks, lighter than 800 grams, or who need complex life support will be provided by neonatal intensive care units. Those are NICUs at Aberdeen Maternity Unit, Edinburgh Royal Infirmary and Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. The new model of neonatal intensive care was recommended by the Best Start report and is reportedly based on evidence that care for babies at highest risk is safest in units which can treat a high volume of patients. Existing neonatal care facilities in Ninewells in Dundee, Princess Royal Maternity in Glasgow, Wishaw General, Victoria Hospital in Kirkcaldy and Crosshouse Hospital in Kilmarnock will continue as local neonatal units to provide neonatal care for their populations. Commenting on the announcement, Women's Health Minister Jenny Minto said that these 3 neonatal intensive care units will offer the most specialist and complex care in fewer centres for the most preterm and sickest babies. Local neonatal units will continue to offer care to babies who need it, including a level of neonatal intensive care, and no neonatal units are closing as part of these plans. This decision has been made in line with advice from expert clinicians. While Leslie Jackson, clinical lead for the Scottish Neonatal Network and a consultant neonatologist in the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, said, "I very much welcome this change to the provision of neonatal intensive care, which will enable clinical teams to deliver the best outcomes for the smallest and sickest babies born in Scotland. The neonatal community is committed to working collaboratively to deliver the new model of neonatal care for our patients and families." Maureen, I was struggling to say the word neonatal that many times. My tongue's gone a bit numb. But this is an interesting mix. It's like that we're having 3 new specialist units, which sounds like centralisation, but at the same time, no other regional neonatal units are getting closed. But From your time in Holyrood as a health minister, you can probably give us a bit more background on what you think about this, and maybe say something about the Best Start report, which was mentioned, but would maybe say something because it's not just about neonatal units, am I right?
Yes, absolutely. It's all about making sure that Scotland gives the best start to children. You know, we have the baby boxes and reading materials for early learners and things like that, the child poverty grant. And these neonatal units are amazing places. As health minister, as you said, Brian, I remember visiting the one in Wishaw, and the care these there for, you know, babies that are literally no bigger than, a kilo bag of sugar was absolutely amazing in their tiny cots and, virtually one-to-one care, and nurses, just checking the babies just every minute is absolutely amazing. But we've known of families where a child has been born poorly and had to be rushed to the few centres that we have, and making sure that there are more centres where you can get this intensive care at the earliest opportunity is really, really important, rather than, say, having to travel to the units that they have now. And this is great news for Aberdeen, because the NHS Grampian are in the process of building a new maternity unit, the Baird Family Centre, and this is just another example of the SNP government's view that you have to give holistic care um, for women who are pregnant and throughout their pregnancy, um, during the birth and thereafter. So making sure that there are enough centre for these very sick babies is really good news. It shows, although the health service has come up in for such huge criticism, that now we're past COVID and the huge amount of resource that COVID took up, that we're getting investment in the health service, and this is good news. And it's not just the only one. Just like today as well, in the NHS Grampian, we've seen new equipment for radiotherapy that's cost millions of pounds coming to NHS Grampian. So, I think these are signs of the health service recovering.
That's great. Thank you, Maureen. I'll move on to the next item. Islanders facing high fuel, food and energy costs are to receive an additional £1 million in support to help meet the cost of living pressures through the island's Cost Crisis Emergency Fund. The fund aims to help mitigate the unique cost of living challenges faced by people living on Scotland's islands, including the colder climate, higher fuel and energy costs and reduced consumer choice. The fund criteria has also been extended to potentially include struggling local businesses. The additional funding will be distributed by the 6 island local authorities, with support targeted where they feel it will be most effective and towards people, communities and businesses who are struggling the most. Previous initiatives funded by the island's Cost Crisis Emergency Fund include food bank grants, Love Local food voucher cards and free school breakfasts. During his trip to Shetland to announce the funding, Local Government Empowerment Minister Joe Fitzpatrick said that no one in Scotland has been shielded from the cost of living crisis, which has been exacerbated by the inflationary crisis caused by the UK Government's actions. But islanders often face even greater challenges due to the unique circumstances of island life. He added, "We have listened to island local authorities and are providing this £1 million of additional funding to help them target support where they have the most concerns." Councillor Maureen Chalmers, COSLA's Community Wellbeing spokesperson, said that this funding will allow for the continuation of past measures made possible by the fund, such as electricity vouchers, provisions of meals and supporting local food initiatives. Adding, "We appreciate the joint work which has taken place between Scottish and local government to ensure this funding is available to our most vulnerable islands communities before the winter." So Maureen, this is a welcome acknowledgement from the Scottish Government that they recognise just how much tougher life on a Scottish island is right now, and with the cost of living crisis, and combined with Brexit and COVID, we're still, which are still impacting island communities. But our report, I think, stressed the point that the money from this support is coming from the Scottish Government. But can you maybe tell us something about the role that COSLA, which was also mentioned in the report, will have played in this? COSLA is a convention of Scottish local authorities, because they're quite important as well, aren't they?
Absolutely. And as you said, Brian, the money is going to be administered by the local authorities themselves. They're best place on the ground to distribute this money, which is a good thing. But I think this all um, goes back to the legislation that was passed to make sure that legislation that is passed is, I think the word was, is island proofed. And as you said, we know that living on the islands is more expensive and can be more expensive. And this is money which the councils can use to help and mitigate that. When I was on last week, we were talking about extra money in terms of energy efficiency measures for the islanders. So this is, the island proofing in action. Okay, people are sitting at home probably saying, "I am the ferries," but I think that is something that will come good as soon as the extra ferries, 6, I think, in total, come on stream. So in terms of ferries, it's a bad situation that we've got to get through. But in terms of the rest of life, getting on with life, these are measures that are helping islanders.
Thank you, Maureen. And thanks for the reminder of the ferries as well. um, so, more medical training posts have been accepted at this stage of, forgive me, the Scottish Government has announced record medical training recruitment levels. More medical training posts have been accepted at this stage of the recruitment year than ever before, exceeding last year's record by 100 posts. NHS Education for Scotland data as of the 25th of July 2023 shows that 1,061 posts have been filled so far this year from the 1,137 that were advertised. This includes 100% fill rates at entry level in general practice, psychiatry, anaesthetics, radiology and emergency medicine. These trainee doctors will take up post in August 2023. Another recruitment round will be held before the end of the year for those taking up post in February 2024. Minister for Public Health Jenny Minto said, "I'm delighted to see that Scotland continues to be recognised as a highly desirable place both to live and pursue a career in medicine. This is testament to our world-class medical education and training system, as well as those working hard to prepare the next generation of doctors who will look after us in the future." These results show that NHS Scotland continues to grow accordingly to meet the needs of its patients, and I look forward to welcoming these new doctors into the health service. NHS Education for Scotland Medical Director Dr Emma Watson said, "As of today, 93% of posts advertised for August 2023 dates, August 2023 start dates in Scotland are filled. Many programmes have filled at 100%, and in programmes which have not filled, we are working to understand why. There has also been a significant expansion of training posts across Scotland, particularly in general practice, which has a current fill rate of 100%. So, Maureen, both the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer, and even the likes of Boris Johnson and others before them, all like to tell us that repeatedly that the Scottish Government, but they usually just shorten that to the SNP government, is failing the people of Scotland when it comes to the Scottish NHS. But this seems to suggest otherwise.
Yes, I mean, this is the second story that we've talked about tonight, where we're seeing investment in the NHS. And I was particularly pleased as a former Minister for Mental Health that you read out that psychiatry has an excellent fill rate, because when I took office as the first ever dedicated Minister for Health in the whole of the UK and probably Europe, that wasn't the case in terms of trainee doctors choosing psychiatry. So I'm really, really pleased to see that is now happening. No doubt the Westminster government will find something wrong with this announcement, but it is showing that the NHS and the medical schools are working hard to make sure that doctors trained in Scotland are retained in Scotland. The news that there are expansion of the number of people going into GP practice is as well is welcome. So I think this all round is a good news story. And the other thing that strikes me about this evening's programme is that we're seeing that during the recess, ministers of the government are obviously not on holiday because there are a lot of them out and about meeting people on the islands, as we've talked about already this evening, but certainly getting out and about around Scotland, which is a good reflection on the new First Minister.
Yes, well spotted, Maureen. Yeah, I have to agree with you there, and also I think it's maybe we should keep an eye on the mainstream media and whether they continue to cover stories like as we do here on Broadcasting Scotland regularly. So I'll move on to our final item. The University of Strathclyde has been announced as a member of a global coalition established to champion equal access to justice worldwide and notably to meet the distinctive rights and needs of children. Strathclyde University has joined the Justice Action Coalition, established under the auspices of the United Nations, the partnership of 35 national governments, UN agencies and international organisations, including the World Bank and the OECD, works to advance justice in countries around the world. With an aim to achieve Agenda 2030 on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, those are SDGs, particularly SDG 16.3, says to ensure equal access to justice for all. Strathclyde's Institute for Inspiring Children's Futures, the IICF, based in the university's Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, has been commissioned to drive the international efforts for children within the coalition, leading the efforts of the Multi-Sectoral Justice Actions Coalition's SDG 16 Working Group on Justice for Children. IICF Executive Director Professor Jennifer Davidson said, "We are proud to be a founding member of the Justice Action Coalition, a role which will grow the global ambitions of governments to achieve SDG 16 for children." In setting out the ambitious visions for sustainable development, the United Nations Agenda 2030 pledges not only to leave no one behind, but also to reach the furthest behind first. Children are among those most at risk of being left behind, especially those facing adversities. She went on to say that at the halfway point to 2030, slowed progress in achieving the SDGs is exacerbating existing inequalities and adversely impacting on our ability to achieve justice for children and consequently justice for all here at home and around the globe. With our fellow coalition members, and with our network of partners in this work for children, we are determined to accelerate this progress to deliver child-centred outcomes. So Maureen, this is quite incredible, isn't it? It's like Strathclyde's Children and Young People Centre for Justice has been highlighted as providing global practice, highlighted as, I can't read my own handwriting here, Maureen, so Strathclyde's Children and Young People Centre for Justice was highlighted as promising global practice for its excellent projects. Scotland really, I'll just cut to the quick, Scotland really is leading the world on this really important area. Another good news story.
Yeah, absolutely. Strathclyde is my alma mater, so I am really chuffed and delighted that Strathclyde are on the forefront of this. Sustainable development goals has probably not been as high up the agenda of news as it has been in the past and should continue to be. And it's great that here is Scotland, with its world-leading universities, more highly educated people per head of population than most countries, showing how it can lead the world. And in this area, I mean, Strathclyde has been helping in international development for as long as I can remember. It is very high up in terms of its reputation for helping in the field of water and water development in sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly in Malawi, and making sure that more water is available to more people. And what's more important for children's development than being as hydrated as possible. And it takes you back, Brian, if you think, to round off the programme, that we have the narrow nationalism of Lord Frost and Boris Johnson and the Tories looking to their own country and saying more people die of cold than they do of heat, so the climate crisis does matter, to Scotland helping on the international stage where we want to be in so many other areas, but with Strathclyde leading the way and our other universities, to be fair, leading on this, is really something that should be broadcast from the hilltops.
Yes, and here at Broadcasting Scotland, we're happy to cover items such as this one, but we will wait to see if the mainstream media are going to do likewise. But just one last question for you. I'm interested in your experience when you were a health minister, and this item said that the aim of this development was not to leave anyone behind, and that children are among the most at risk of being left behind, especially those facing adversities. I just wondered if maybe you would have a personal insight from when you were a health minister to sort of whether that is true about children being left behind.
Um, you mean here in Scotland or
Yeah,
globally?
yeah, in Scotland, well, whatever, really. Maybe you could compare it to what's happening in other countries. Just a human
Well, I
interest
think,
story, I thought.
since 2007, the Scottish government's mantra has been, early intervention and prevention in terms of growing up. So I think, governments are also always, or often, should I say, talked about as being just looking at the next election and short termism. But I think since 2007, we have, as a country, looked more at long term goals in terms of, investing in children, which is not something that you will see the overall benefits for until later on. And I think that is coming to fruition. We're seeing children coming out of school going to more positive destinations in Scotland compared to other countries of the UK. And not as a minister, but having visited Malawi, I know in terms of the Scotland Malawi partnership how much of their work is focused on early years and making sure that future generations don't commit the sins and mistakes of past generations. So, yeah, I think it's a rosy outlook. But you're always learning from other countries, including those in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think people who go there come back with more knowledge than perhaps they thought they were kind of passing on in Malawi, perhaps.
I mean, it's good to be an outward-looking nation rather than an isolated nation after something like Brexit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I don't know about you, Brian, but I miss the interaction. And the times before when you used to either as an individual or as an elected member or as a minister would interact. I don't mean going on jollies to Europe, because that never happened at all very much for the ministerial team when I was in government. But and we've seen the UK government try to rein the Scottish government in terms of dealing with other countries through the our hubs in Europe and elsewhere. So yeah, put the brakes and the reins on Scotland, Westminster. Is that really the kind of country that we want to live in the future? And that's the kind of things that I hope will be points of talking and debate in the run up to the general election. Never mind talking about independence or independence referenda.
Okay, and that, as that was the last item, and when I was saying at the beginning we were going to be rushed for time, but we've actually, and we started a minute or two late. I want to let you get back to your evening, but just before we do go, is there anything maybe tonight that you didn't get to say that you'd like to say in one of the previous stories?
Um, no,
Anything
I
that,
think
no?
I hope that our listeners feel that we've covered the items and done them justice, and I'm glad we've managed to catch up in time. Maybe I haven't been rambling on so much as I might have done previously.
You always bring the answers in bang on time, Maureen. I can testify that because I've seen it happen so many times. It's like the host doesn't have to do very much at all when you're the guest. So thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a
We'll
pleasure.
see you again then, Maureen. Thank you. So that's it for this evening. But before I go, just want to remind you again that here at Broadcasting Scotland we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view, as you know, but if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and to ensure that we are able to continue making programmes like this one. We have raised over £9,000 so far, but we really need to get to raise the remaining £21,000 as soon as possible. So it just leaves me to say good night and thank you for watching.